All right, here we go. I have my little son. A little hot. Whatever, I don't care. How you doing, Dan?
I'm excited, Jack. I'm excited. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm a little nervous.
Oh, yeah,
It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right.
What is the episode that we've done that you felt most nervous about potentially, not you, but us, misconstruing the author's intended purpose?
I don't know.
Capital,
Every time
I
we start
guess.
we got capital, yeah.
Silly question, capital. Dan, how you doing? It's a beautiful sunny day.
It's a balmy day.
Yeah, it's balmy. That's
It's
for
very
sure.
warm. It's very warm.
Yeah.
Promising at least another week.
Yeah, at
Well,
least.
Maybe it was the best of this week. I don't know. Anyway.
I think it's going to rain Friday. But anyways. I tell you what, Dan. Cool 400-year-old buildings are very neat.
Yeah.
Not much ventilation, circulation. They get hot. I'll tell you that right now. Very hot. But yeah, another beautiful day in the south of England. Here
I mean, I live in a 450-year-old building.
That's
and
true.
it's incredibly cool in the downstairs of my house. And upstairs. Yeah, it's cool. It's quite a cool house, actually. It's quite a cool house.
See, it's that third floor. Here.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just
You're
that
basically,
heat.
you're living in an attic.
Exactly. I'm
And
literally
there's
living
like no
in an attic.
insulation between. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well. My plants like it, I think. I've just realized that I think my leeks are in too small of a container because they've plateaued. They've stopped growing for about 2 weeks. So
Okay.
whatever. Leeks. What are you gonna do?
You need to plant them out.
Either plant them out. Yeah, I don't know. Does anything eat leeks?
I don't know. You've got a pest problem at the moment. Have you
God,
not?
no kidding. All sorts of pests. I got slugs. I got pigeons. They've eaten all my damn Brussels sprouts.
Foxes.
Foxes. That's the biggest problem. They're back. After last week, I was like, we solved it. Foxes, we're on peace terms now. Now we're not. Now it's back to war. So if you know any foxes, tell them to stay away from my allotment. That's all I know. What are you gonna do? Pests.
I've got a massive slug and snail problem.
Oh yeah.
So that's going to need to be fixed.
Yeah. I don't know what to do. If you don't want to kill them, like I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
It's just like get ducks, I guess. I mean, then you're gonna kill them, but I think ducks is the answer.
We've got a hedgehog that visits our garden, but we've got raised beds, and we were discussing the other day whether the hedgehog might go up some kind of ramp. If we constructed a ramp into the raised bed, whether it would go up there and eat all
Then you
the
could do
stuff
like a
themselves.
hamster wheel for it, a hedgehog that's
Yeah,
hamster wheel.
yeah. I just need to build it a little house in the corner of the bed, don't I? Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the hedgehog here is gone. I think it's off. It's like too much is going on.
I was very pleased to see that ours had returned. It was hanging around last year, and we hadn't seen it. So
Do they hibernate? Do you
I guess
think?
they must. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Good for them. Good for the hedgehogs. Pests that we like. So I guess not pests.
Critters.
Critters.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
a big difference.
Yeah. We just gathered all the slugs and snails up and took them across the road and put them in.
Wait a minute. Across the road. Wait a minute.
Tipped them into Jack's bed.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's been eating all my stuff. Usually when I find a big slug at the allotment, I just pick it up and just throw it. I'm just like, so you're going to land where you're going to land. Sorry.
I just assume they'll be fine.
They'll be fine. They're squishy. What's the worst going to happen? Yeah.
So yeah, need to solve that problem.
Diatomaceous earth, I've heard. Putting it around the stems of your plants, like that white. There's plenty of it around here, I think. It's like made from like a compression of like Dead Sea stuff, but it's just like chalky and white. It just looks like chalk, but on like a microscopic level, it's very sharp. And so like slugs go over it and they go, whoa. And they back up.
Okay.
That's what I've heard. So maybe order some of
Have
that.
to find some of that,
Yeah.
or I can just keep yeeting them into next door.
Or keep doing that. Get a little caterpillar, catapult. That was hard to say. Jeez. A caterpillar.
You don't
pulp.
mean a catapult. A slug catapult.
A slug catapult. Oh my God, I do. Jesus.
It's a slug catapult made of caterpillars.
A slug trebuchet.
So Jack,
So, Dan. Really quickly, should we just say thank you again to Thelma Walker?
Yes.
Because that episode rocked. That was
yeah.
great.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I think-
for everybody who listened to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for everybody who sent such kind feedback.
Thank you to our new listeners, because I know we've gotten some. Hopefully you've stuck around. Hello. Welcome. Most of you are probably from the north. I was just there. It's beautiful. So welcome, everybody. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, go watch the video. It's on our YouTube channel. Plug. Dan. So, okay, Dan, a while ago, longtime listeners will know that I was teasing a book called The Book that turned out to be The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot, CIA History. kind of also been semi-teasing another book, and that is the book that we're reading, the first 4 chapters of today, and the first 3 forwards, technically. We're finally getting to it.
Yeah.
I'm stoked.
It's the new must read.
Yeah, everybody's doing it.
The new I want to say tome, but actually it's incredibly digestible. It's incredibly easy to read
Large
and very
text.
clear. Who knew this has been hanging around for the past 95 years?
Yeah.
I mean, somebody knew, clearly.
Yeah. The Dutch.
So yes, the new must read, the new hot thing in the very small circles of internet socialist/communist podcasts. What are we reading, Jack? Why don't you tell me what we're reading?
Dan, what are we? No,
we are the proud owners of 2 copies of.
They're here. We're looking at them. 2 copies of, drum roll, the fundamental principles, the elegantly named, I will say, fundamental principles of communist production and distribution by the group of international communists. I think pretty much mainly just written by one guy, but put out by the group of international communists. Council communist? ? Perhaps. So we're back on it. It didn't take long. We're back on it.
We're back on the Council Communism.
Yeah.
They are definitely Council Communists. Yeah.
I tell you,
This is a brand new translation of the second edition from 1935, recently translated and published last year or the year before.
Oh.
So, go check it out. Also, stop listening to this and go and listen to the episodes of Swampside Chats that Tom O'Brien featured on, where they discussed this. Actually, I think it was a collaboration between those 2 podcasts, Swampside Chats and From Alpha to Omega, and they talked about this in great detail. So yeah, go listen to that. But also listen to our ramblings.
Put this on mute in the background.
Yeah. Or you could listen to both at the same time.
That would be awful. But yes, you could do that. Okay, back on the Council Communist kick. And I think I'm figuring these people out a little bit. Because initially, okay, so first of all, this book is exactly what it says to be. It claims to be the fundamental principles of how a communist society would organize its production and distribute those goods. Mm-hmm. As we've said, I'm going to try not to say commodity, but if I do, just know I mean product. And it's really okay. First of all, it rocks. Let's just get that out there. This book is amazing. It's written in such a really easy to understand style. It's whenever it wants you to really notice something, it's all in bold with 5 exclamation points, and it's underlined and in italics. It does that a lot, which I find very, very good. But to me, this just kind of seems like, as Dan and I are, people who have read the first chapter of Capital will have you know, this seems to just be like really just kind of taking the next logical steps of applying Marx's and Engels' actual economic thought. Do you think that's crazy? Because I mean, perhaps not political thought. We might get to that later, but economic thought, productive, distributive. I think it seems pretty close to the source material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it might even be quite close to the political thought of Marx and Engels, such that it existed. At least in terms of like the commitment to the autonomous activity of the working class over sort of formal institution or sort of intellectuals, or the commitment to socialism from below as opposed to socialism opposed from above, as we read about 2 weeks ago when we talked about Hal Draper.
Yeah, we also did the Draper.
But yeah, it makes you ask the question, what the hell happened in the meantime?
Yeah, no kidding.
But I mean, this book actually does sort of chart some aspects of that history, the various efforts to revise Marxism, and the efforts to don't want to say subvert, but to sort of overlook some of the quite overt things that Marx and Engels said about what socialism and communism would be, and the effort that was made by disciples of theirs to, yes, as I say, overlook certain of those clear commitments. And yeah, just like our last interaction with Council Communism, it's an instance of everybody else is wrong.
Exactly. This is definitely an instance of that.
And I think they're probably right. And given as I say, it's like a 95-year-old book. It's an incredibly refreshing. Well, then and now, I would imagine, an incredibly refreshing just resetting of the scene, I suppose. I mean, a little bit like what I was saying about Hal Draper 2 weeks ago, where it sort of casts certain things in a totally different light, kind of laying a different conceptual framework over things. This similarly is pointing at quite a number of ways in which, like, both this we're talking about like turn of the century socialist movements. I mean, this was written in 35, but it's incredibly influenced by, I suppose, the first decade, the first 15 years of the Soviet experience, and then also like the preceding 2 decades of the beginning of the 20th century, the intellectual and the political developments, both. But I mean, basically, that were defined by the experience of social democracy, basically German social democracy, that was sort of cast such a large shadow over all of European socialist thought in that period of time, kind of thing. So this is basically a direct response to that sort of first 30-year history of the 20th century, particularly as it pertained to socialist, both intellectual thought, but also the actual advancement of socialist ideas on a political scale.
Prescient, too, for when it was written.
Prescient for then. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, prescient for now, damn.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're getting close, Dan, to defining what socialism is with this book. And I'm going to start us off just by hitting everybody with a quote, if I may. So I suppose maybe to frame this a bit, they basically, we were talking about this right before we started recording. This book is about the distribution and production that would need to take place for a society to be communist. It's not really about much else. So to start this quote off, they say, "So this book can never replace the class struggle. It only wants to express economically what will happen politically. For this, it was necessary not to take the abolition of private property and means of production as a starting point, but the abolition of wage labor. All thoughts are based around this, and our research leads us to the conclusion that the workers who come to power in mass movements can only hold this political power if they abolish wage labor in economic life by taking working time as the central axis around which economic life moves." That's basically what we've read so far in a nutshell. And we'll get to the last bit about working time as the central axis for everything. But just to say, Dan, the version of communism that they're outlining it's like bizarro capitalism in that it's like everything is different, but there are so many mirror forms that are exactly, I mean, obviously not exactly, but they're so similar. And I mean, to take their first point first, I guess, they're saying that communism isn't just when we abolish private property. Communism has to be and is and will be when we get rid of wage labor. And that I think I did a little annotation next to that the first time I read it, which was just a little man with his mind being blown. Because it's like, they're council communists, so they're going to say everything else is state capitalism that's been done. But they're backing that up with like this really clear and to me, like, awesome point about why that is and why everything that's been tried has been state capitalism. Because everything that has been tried has led to workers more or less selling their labor on a market. And whether that's the Soviets trying to make things, like an economy in kind, or whether it's just another kind of just blatant market socialism, you can't have communism. You can't have people actually be liberated until you make this kind of equivalent exchange, which there isn't under capitalism, of labor and what you get from society. Because and I was telling you right before that I kind of think about this as like almost like a bit of metabolic rift, because it's like the energy that you're putting into the system, into society through your labor is not the same as you're getting out of it. What you're getting is a wage, which is, basically like, go listen to our episodes on Capital for why that's not exactly what you're getting out of it. But the whole point of this book is to right that wrong and to make it so that what you're putting into society is exactly what you're getting out of it. And when they explained that, I was just like, it rocks. It's so, so, so cool. And it all just comes down to getting rid of wage labor. But to tie it all up again, what they kind of wind up replacing it with is something that looks a lot like, perhaps, I might get hassled for saying this, but like kind of like a wage, even though you're not getting paid for your concrete labor, et cetera, you're not being exploited. It has these interesting mirror forms, which is, it's awesome.
Yeah, they are sweepingly radical, as one would have to be if one were proposing a total change in the mode of production, which is what they are doing. But it feels like a very surgical and a very clinical, like sort of cutting away of everything that is clearly and purely capitalist. But at the same time, it's reminiscent of like, I mean, to me, like obviously, like my mind always goes to what we've read about the transition from feudalism to capitalism.
Okay.
Always.
Who wrote that book again?
Yeah. Go back and listen to episodes 3 and 4 on the origins of capitalism. A book written by Ellen Meekson's Wood, elaborating on the theories of Robert Brenner. Other theories of the transition are available if one wants to go and read them.
Nah, don't.
We keep promising that we might, or I keep telling myself that maybe we ought to interact with some more of this theory, but
figured it out.
It's not happened yet. It's not happened so far. I'm so convinced it was England. Yeah. I mean, we're so keen to dislike England.
Syphilitic.
Yeah. Yeah. The point being that like transitions between modes of production are incredibly stark shifts that are almost possible to miss if you blink. Like it feels like this is not quite. I mean, there's a piece of there's a thing that's been going over and over in my mind, in our minds, in the sort of collective consciousness of the podcast over all of these episodes, which is this idea that like modes of production change when there is some kind of class struggle where people are basically just trying to maintain their continue to survive in their current arrangement, but the back and forth of the class struggle actually leads to this unintentional change kind of thing. Well, that's not quite what is being described here, but you can indeed see aspects of this whereby certain things continue in a very recognizable form.
That's a great point.
In this new mode of production. And it's worth pointing out that what they're describing here is a sort of staged transition. Like we all know quite a lot of things about what communism is meant to be. I mean, obviously there's the famous phrase about from each according to their ability and to each according to their need. In this book and also in Marx's analysis, like that is a feature of a much later, much more mature and developed socialism, communism. I'm just gonna. We ought to commit to some terminology. I suppose we ought to commit to communism as the piece of the terminology because the book says communism.
Book says communism.
But if I do accidentally say socialism
or commodity,
well, let's forget that for a minute. If I do accidentally say socialism because I'm a bit worried about saying communism, I basically mean the same thing. So there's cards on the table. This is a theory of transition where there are stages, much like the transition to capitalism, right? Like the transition to capitalism they weren't. I mean, there probably were, but like there was a period of history where there was capitalism, but there wasn't wage labor. So something that we clearly now we hear is a fundamental feature of the capitalist mode of production, wage labor, which needs to be abolished, wasn't there from the outset, kind of thing. So obviously, modes of production are defined by certain characteristics, but they do evolve over time. And the same will be true of communism. There will be a gradual evolution into a more mature form of what that is. Here, what we're talking about is the very early stages of the transition to a sort of like a sort of lower stage communism. I think is the correct piece of terminology.
Yeah. Can I just stop you for a sec, just because I want to take it back to something you said about you just said this, and you also said it right before we started recording about this and the councilists in general as being more radical economically, at least, than say like Bolsheviks or anybody like that. And I hadn't thought about that before.
I think less radical.
Or less radical. Yeah,
less radical.
And I hadn't thought of that because immediately I hear councilists and I'm just like, damn, they're probably like lefties.
Yeah, these left comms.
These goddamn left comms. But you're absolutely right. It is less radical, but at the same time, again, like it's almost more radical because it's like, okay, guys, we're not just going to do
It's
a
radical
crazy...
by virtue of its practicality.
Exactly. It's not like we're not just going to do crazy economy and kind stuff here. We're not going to go that far. It's way more simple than that. Like, don't get your socks in a knot or whatever. Like, the answers are basically in capitalism. And that sounds like something that, like, if I were to hear someone say that, it'd be like, don't ever listen to this person again. But like, it's absolutely true, because it's like, just by shifting this thing, which is replacing wage labor with some sort of system based around socially necessary labor time or whatever, you get this massive shift, because you're just not being exploited, or at least not being exploited as much, because we'll get to kind of why it's not like a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, what you put into what you get out. But like, you're right, it is less radical, but it leads to just like something exponentially more communist, air quotes. No, not air quotes. No air quotes there. Than, say, economy and kind. It's mind-boggling, and you're absolutely right. And
the Soviet in the narrative of this book, the Soviet alternative to that process, as you say, the sort of like trade of goods in kind, which we'll come on to defining in a minute, I would imagine. In the narrative of this book, as I say, like, collapsed within 18 months and 2 years, and if you believe that the Soviet Union was operating some kind of version of capitalism, then capitalism in some form reinstituted itself almost immediately in the Soviet Union, because their effort was so catastrophically
focused on private property, and focused on private property instead of on wage labor, which they're like,
sure, yeah. Should we talk about what they mean by wage labor, or what they intend? Because like, you were right to talk about exploitation and domination. Like, they start with the very basics of Marxism, right? At the beginning of chapter 1. After an obligatory reference to like councils and how great councils are, because obviously they're councils communists.
Are great.
They then get on to their second great love, which is Karl Marx. So yeah, like some like basic Marxism 101, like capitalism is a form of class society whereby one class exploits the labor of another class. Privileged ownership of means of production. Capitalists maintain a relationship of domination with workers, whereby they do not remunerate them fully for the work that they do, but only pay them a small quantity of the value that they create for the capitalists. I.e., the capitalists take the majority of the product, and the wage laborers are left only with their wage.
Enough to basically reproduce yourself.
Yeah. And I suppose it's worth remembering that, like, in wage labor, like, laborers sell their ability to work to a capitalist. Just like any commodity, the capitalist buys a certain amount of labor in the form of sort of like hours of work from workers, and sort of combines that with the means of production that he already owns, and makes commodities. And therefore sells those commodities for a profit on the market, and the workers are left only with their meager wage. So obviously the beginning of this criticism is where one that would say the problem is private ownership of means of production, and much like the Social Democrats of this era, much like the Bolsheviks, so they basically just refer to as the radical Social Democrats in brackets Bolsheviks, which is an apt title, I think. They would all obviously agree that the basis for overcoming capitalism is the abolition of private property. But what the system of wage labor, the system of basically the system of bondage in which workers are kept under capitalism, it separates them from means of production, which under other modes of production they may have owned themselves, they now don't own. But also the process, the relationship of wage labor remunerates them with a wage that's paid for their ability to work, and they're in that process separated from any right to determine or dictate what happens to the things that they produce. So wage laborers under capitalism are not only separated from means of production, they're also separated from the product. And so basically, it feels like the crux of their argument is that it's not good enough just to go after private ownership of the means of production, but it's also, you've got to go after anything that isn't socially mediated and determined distribution of the products. What they call that, the right to disposal of the products. The products of production have to be owned and controlled, and their fate, I suppose, decided upon by the workers, not by the capitalists. And so you get from this a particular critique of like the Soviet Union and what people have come to think of as communist societies, I suppose.
And I mean, yeah, obviously they make the point where they're like, it's not, since we have social division of labor, it's not really actually possible for you to have the actual literal right to dispose of every product that you make. And we'll get around to kind of like, it was only on my second time reading through it. We should say we only read the first 4 chapters. It was only until the second time reading through this that I realized how the right of disposal connects to this new system that they're talking about. Before we get to that, I'm just going to read a little bit more about wage labor kind of before we move on from it, because this is a really important point about wage labor being the thing. Private property, bad. Wage labor, very bad. So they say the peculiarity of the amount of work we give to society has nothing to do with the wages. There's some of this translation which is a little hard to get through, so if I stumble, my apologies. Which we give to society has nothing to do with the wages, which is much more important than the question of distribution alone. This means that the wage worker has nothing to do with the social product. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. The value of the labor force is the bearer of all of these conflicts. This is because our work does not determine our relationship to the social product! Exclamation point. The workers, who believe that a communist revolution is only about the passing of the surplus value onto the owners of the state, are therefore deeply mistaken. Skipping forward a little bit more. For the wage workers, therefore, the goal of the new proletarian revolution can only be to establish a new relationship between the producer and the social product. And then, in all bold with exclamation points, abolition of wage labor, work is the measure of consumption. So it's exactly what you're saying. You can't just say, state, do things, take away everything from capitalists. There, we did it. No more private property, this is communism. Because there, you still just have workers being exploited. This is what a lot of the councilists that we've been reading recently have gotten to without getting into the kind of like scientific detail of it, which they kind of do here, which is, they just basically say, that was state capitalism, don't worry about it. But here they're giving you an actual reasonable reason for why, if not state capitalism, which I think they would say, just not communism. And that's the wage labor. It doesn't really matter, like, if you're setting things up like the Soviets did, if you're still trading your labor and you're getting less than what you put into it, that's not communism. And again, we'll get onto what this, the way that they get around this is, but it's like, looks a lot like what we have now, which is, again, crazy.
Yeah, their argument is in the Soviet Union, people were still paid a wage. They still didn't have the right to dispose of the goods that they produced, and that by virtue of that fact, the state was therefore buying labor in the way that the capitalists used to buy labor. There continued to be a market in the value of labor, kind of thing. Labor continues as a commodity in the way that it exists under capitalism, which undermines the whole project, I suppose, if you're maintaining such a key feature of capitalism in your supposedly communist system. And they do outline in some detail that we probably won't go into, like some of the sort of social aspects of the social discord that was sown in the Soviet Union in terms of like the wrangling between the state and the supposed official trade unions, and quite what the value of the labor was going to be. And therefore, of course, like if the state is interested in creating surpluses in the same way that a capitalist was interested in creating surpluses, then the state is therefore interested in exploiting the labor of workers in a way that the capitalist the capitalist mode of production was interested in exploiting the labor of workers, kind of thing. So there's the basic relationship of the wage relation, the basic relationship that dictates the key features of wage labor, I suppose, is maintained in your supposedly socialist communist system.
Yeah, supposedly. Speaking of supposed communists, Dan, we've talked about our friends, the Soviets, unless there's anything else you want to say on them for now. I was just going to talk about our friends, perhaps anarchists. Again. So a large point of these first 4 chapters is basically saying you can't think about federalization, centralization, any of these questions without first talking about the organization of the economic unit, without thinking of the organization of your productive apparatuses and your distribution, blah, 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 blah. They say you can't really think about that until you answer these questions. And basically, they're really making the point here that, like, once again, you can't, we've brought this up on our previous councilist episodes, but like you can't try and live in a society and at the same time be free from it. And so their main point here is that there needs to be one binding rule. There needs to be rules that all producers follow. And these aren't like, like iron-fisted, like bureaucratic, like you must produce everything like this. You must do it all like this. This is just an economic law that everybody follows. And this is the idea of basically doing everything around the basic unit of the socially average working hour. So this is something that I hope I don't botch, but this is something that we've talked about a bit in our capital episodes, which is basically the difference between your concrete labor, which is the labor that you yourself as a person do when you go to work, and the socially average labor, basically, which is like, say you make chairs for a living. It's the average amount of time that takes everybody to make a similar type of chair. And that's the binding economic unit, the law, that they're talking about. Because I think if you were to confront a lot of people and you were to say, well, get rid of wage labor, get rid of markets, get rid of all this stuff, they might be like, this seems pretty insane. Nothing's going to regulate itself at all. But they're saying that this is the way that you regulate everything. So at the same time, it's exactly what you were saying earlier about like this is less radical than just like either the in-kind Soviet model or the like no rules, producers do literally whatever you want. They're like, there needs to be one basis, one unit that everybody follows. And it's this idea of the socially average working hour. So again, Dan, the councilists coming through. I keep expecting them to just be like loony, like, here we go. All right. This is going to be close to anarchism. But once again, they come through with like an actual, or at least these people do, they come through with an actual, like, no, guys, we got to organize stuff. We got to, have some rules if we're going to have a society.
Yeah, I mean, it's just coming back to this idea. I mean, you allude to it obviously that there are it's weird kind of mirror universe parallels between capitalism and communism as it's being advocated for us here, and I suppose if there is in people's minds this idea that like this might almost be like utopian thinking, this is like so far out there, how could you even imagine like implementing this kind of a system? Like capitalism is a self-regulating system, right? Like, I mean, it's an incredibly inefficient one in a lot of respects. It causes a great deal of crises. It creates huge maldistributions. Blah 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 blah. Add whatever critique. Critique whatever critique of capitalism you want to put in. But it does regulate itself. It does function. Production happens. Distribution happens. Consumption happens. All that's been proposed here is you tweak the regulating, almost self-regulating features of capitalism into a new mode of production, kind of thing. And as you say, yeah, the measure they intend to use is the socially necessary labor time. They intend simply to measure the amount of time that it takes to create any product, and then price those products when they come to be consumed by people in labor hours. It's an interesting point that they're making, whereby, again, like if you think of this dichotomy between private versus social ownership of the means of production and private versus social control of the right, I would say it again, like rights of disposal over the product, but basically like control of what happens to the product kind of thing. You have this existing binary between the two. And the same thing as they're saying, like people's labor, when they go to work, when they work in production, is measured in time, in labor hours, in what service you do to society. And the only way that you can equally remunerate people is to have to be remunerated by an equal quantity of socially useful labor, I suppose. Obviously, capitalism is a social system. Like we've talked about this, like, well, when we talked about commodity fascism in capitalism, like, we experience the commodities as bearing the value that we think that they do, but really it's just a representation of all of the social activity that's gone into putting that thing in front of us on the shop shelves, or more often in the Amazon web store kind of thing.
You boomer. In the Amazon web store. Well, you're right. It removes commodity fetishism.
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah. So one cannot work one's own means of production and have a right to own whatever that one produces with your personal means of production. The means of production are going to have to be socialized, and you're going to have to take from the social stock what is due to you based on what you've put in. And this is a way of regulating that process of ensuring that people take out what they put in, kind of thing. Not necessarily for some kind of like moralistic principle, but based on the principle that you're going to have some kind of regulatory mechanism for how your economic system is going to work. You can't just like do without a regulatory mechanism that includes within it sort of like a feedback mechanism. Like the realms of production and the realms of consumption have to be mirrored, or you're not going to produce the requisite quantity of things that people want to consume, kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know whether that.
No, yeah,
but I mean, like we could. I mean, the opposite of this is what we've been referring to as remuneration in kind, right? Which is what the Soviet Union tried, and what this book suggests. The Soviet Union's experiment in this kind of economic organization and planning was the death knell of that very form of economic organization and planning.
Oops.
Although they do say that this wasn't something that was purely a fault of the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union. Like, they were drawing on commonly understood economic wisdom, both of all of the mainstream wings of like European social democracy, and they also lump the anarchists in as well with this, as having this basic understanding of communism being you don't have some kind of unit of remuneration, but rather you just trade goods. So like one factory produces one thing, and they receive all of their all of the materials they need to do their their piece of production, and they pass on what they've produced onto the next factory without there being any kind of like accounting mechanism going on between these various sort of units of the economy, like firms, kind of thing. Which, yeah, I mean, went sort of like
haywire.
Went quite haywire in the Soviet Union. Which this book puts down to a basic flaw in that, well, they're quite stark in the terms that they use. That I don't know whether they call it like moronic or stupid or like, but they're just like, who would think of doing anything as stupid as trying to run an economy without a unit of accounting is the phrase that they use, but like some mechanism for
accounting.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus.
Some amount of bookkeeping needs to go on.
Yeah.
And rather what the Soviet Union did was thought that they could just dictate production based from some kind of like central bureaucratic office, I suppose, based upon a sort of centrally determined and decided upon plan kind of thing. But this is another example of the two realms being separated, right? Like you have a central body trying to decide what people are going to want, and they're telling production what to produce with no real way of actually confirming whether these are the right quantities of things to be producing or blah, 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 that kind of thing. So like it's just the intricacies of planning at this period of time were so extremely difficult, I suppose.
I suppose
that far better in I don't know. Do you want to?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I have no idea. It's when I first came across this idea of like everybody calculating labor time, which we should say is a vital aspect of this of communism, as they say, every firm has to report how much time it's taking to create a product, so you can get the average time that it takes across society. When I first came across that, I was like, Jesus Christ, that sounds complicated. But then we started talking about it, and it's like, well, it actually isn't that complicated. And I mean, it's made exponentially easier with computers, but like, it seems doable. It seems like it would have been doable back then. I don't know if I can say that for sure, but like, they were doing some pretty crazy stuff with like input-output tables where it required like stuff that we would never even think of doing right now without a computer. Mm-hmm. So like just the simple, hey, it took everybody on average in this factory 8 hours to make a shoe. That'd be a nice shoe, but like, perhaps possible.
Sure. No, I'm not criticizing the prospect of the possibility of planning an economy based on this unit.
Oh, okay.
And like describing economy. What you mean like you make a really essential point, or you describe the system that they're proposing very well. We've only read the first 4 chapters, so we'll get onto it. But what I understand to be the system that they're proposing, you describe it very well. I just mean like you're describing a system where they are using this unit of measurement, a unit of accounting, whereas like the Soviet Union was trying to do it without that, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah. If every workplace that produces a certain type of thing just decides or says how long it takes them to produce one unit of that thing, and then you just compare all the workplaces that are making all of those things, then there you have it. Like there's the socially necessary amount of labor time that has to go into producing a thing, kind of thing.
Yeah, the Soviet model definitely led to a lot of screwy bookkeeping of like, yeah, we made 1,000 of these type of thing. Or like, oh my God, we can't make any more and selling it on the black market. Here, there's a failsafe where it's like, what would motivate you to lie about how long it took you to do something? And we should also say, I don't think I was very clear. It isn't how long it takes you to make a product. I had a bit of a meltdown yesterday texting Dan about a pizza is going to be the most expensive thing on the planet because of the time it takes to grow tomatoes and to get the cheese and the cow and everything. But no, it's just the labor time that goes into making those things. So you're right. Like the time it takes to grow a tomato is a long time, but the labor time that goes into making these tomatoes, especially with modern tomato engineering, isn't much at all. It's like, I trim that off. Okay, was that a second? You know what I mean? So yeah. Anyway, that's
and I mean, you made the very fair point, and we should circle back around to this. That like, this is very close to what capitalism does.
It is,
right?
Yeah.
Like something that contains a lot of parts, but is actually quite cheap in our contemporary economy, is still going to be relatively cheap when measured in labor hours, right? Like a pizza is not going to cost you like hundreds of hours of labor time just because it features a lot of different component parts, kind of thing.
Communism foiled by a pizza. Owned. Facts and logic.
So how far have we gotten?
Well, let me just go back real quick, just because you made a really great point about commodity fetishism, which is I think we need to highlight too that like when you organize things based around the socially average working hour instead of the individual working hour, like a wage labor does, it does get rid of commodity fetishism. And what that does to the individual is when you're in a quote unquote shop under this mode of communism, that like you know exactly what went into making that T-shirt because it's priced at not only something you understand, but at the socially average working hour that, okay, here's what all of society put into making this shirt. Now if you worked that much, sure, you go ahead. So I just wanted to focus on that just real quickly, just to say that's a big point.
Then you know how much of your work is going into buying any one of these things.
There's nothing veiled.
Yeah. Your an hour of your labor is directly comparable with an hour of anybody else's work across the entirety of this the social mode of production kind of thing.
Yeah, which is why you can't base it on concrete labor, your labor, because it's like, wow, this guy, look at him. He's a savant at making pizzas. He makes so many more pizzas than me. I do my hardest and I do my best. I can still only make half as many pizzas as this guy. It's to average out across society, so you're not getting screwed because you're not a pizza savant. You know what I mean? Which is literally what happens now. All I'm saying, that's what wage labor is. It's measuring on the concrete individual working hours.
I'd rather go a different way and say that under communism, every pizza maker would be a savant.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's what Marx meant when he said you'll be able to like exercise all of your humanity. Be a pizza maker in the morning and a pizza maker at night and a pizza maker in the afternoon. All right. Where are we going next? Away from pizzas.
I'm trying to work out chapter 3 in this book is like replete with example after example from the writings of Marx and Engels, whereby they're saying basically labor time accounting would be the unit of account in communism, and it would be absurd. Well, they don't go so far as to say it would be absurd to say anything other than that. But in this book, the group of international communists are presenting this as a serious sort of deviation from Marxist economics and Marxism that all other Marxists in the intervening period between Marx and Engels and these guys have all fallen for.
Can I just say really quickly on that point? It feels like, you always get the Marx and Engels never talked about what communism would look like. It's you get the sense from their writing that it's because it's like obvious. Like whenever they reference a communist society based around the socially average working hour, they're like, what other conclusion would you have taken from what we're talking about? You know what I mean? They're like, why do you think we're making this distinction between the concrete and the abstract? They're like, have you read us? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems obvious, like going from there. They're like, yes, it would be based around the socially average labor time. Anyway, I just think it's an interesting point.
It's all from reading this book, I sort of get the impression that one ought read Marx and Engels' economic writings as saying, here we're describing the economic mode of production of capitalism. But the critique contains a kind of like, here are all the ways that capitalism is making a series of minor or major flaws, and here's the sort of slight tweak that you might make, kind of thing. So like, maybe I'll just try and read this. There's a very clunky quote from Engels. And I don't know whether I'm going to be able to get through it. And if I make any mistakes, I might just put it down to it being a very clunky quote rather than
translation.
Yeah, it's all the translation's fault. I don't know. And hopefully after I've read it out, then I'll be able to riff some other stuff from it. I don't know. Society can simply calculate how many hours of labour are contained in a steam engine, a bushel of wheat of the last harvest, or 100 square yards of cloth of a certain quality. It could, basically he's describing a communist society here, so like obviously communism can basically just work out the amount of labour hours in any particular product of anybody working in a communist society. And therefore in a communist society, the quote continues, it could therefore never occur to it still to express the quantities of labour put into the product, quantities it will then know directly in their absolute amount in a third product, in a measure which, besides, is only relative, fluctuating, inadequate, though formally unavailable for lack of a better one, rather than express them in their natural, adequate, and absolute measure, time. I don't know if this made any sense. Hence, on the assumption we made above, society will not assign value to products. Right. Okay. Maybe that can all stay in and maybe it can go out. Basically, the point that I want to try and make is to explain what might be something that we were having difficulty with initially was, how does labor time, as it's been described in this quote, differ from value as it functions under capitalism? And basically what the point that's being made by Marx and Engels, as quoted by in this book, is that value, as we've learned from our small initial dipping the toe forays into attempting to read Capital. The value of a commodity under capitalism only finds its expression when you compare one commodity to another commodity. It's only as in a relationship between two commodities that value is revealed, and the true source of value for Marx and Engels is abstract labor, the amount of socially necessary labor time that's contained in a thing. But the truth of that initial origin, that starting point of value under capitalism, is concealed and only appears as this mysterious quality of a commodity when it's compared to other commodities. Under this proposed mode of production and under this sort of sketch of what socialism would look like, you wouldn't need to have value be this sort of mysterious emergent quality that was only glimpsed and was largely veiled from our eyes, that only expressed itself in exchange, and which appeared to be something unique to the commodity, i.e., appears in the form of commodity fetishism. Those things wouldn't continue because you would know specifically how much labor was in things. So you wouldn't have to carry on with these sort of like capitalist mystifications. This is what I was trying to get at when I was saying that, like, there might be a way to read Marx and Engels, which is like, here is all these capitalist mystifications. Like the basis of organizing an economy is kind of true, but capitalism can't go all the way. Capitalism can't go all the way because it's committed to a form of mode of production which is reliant on the exploitation of a certain class's labor. But if we can abolish, if we can remove certain core features of capitalism which holds it back, then you can have this unmystified mode of production. I suppose you can get to what we have been describing in this whole process as like a form of economy where things are priced with their true price, and you know the true value of the what you're paying for things, kind of thing. And you know the true value of your labor, and you know the true price in air quotes of the things that you're purchasing in air quotes again.
And it is so simple too. That's what almost pisses me off about this book, is that it's so simple. It's just all you have to do is swap the measure from the individual working hour to the socially average working hour, and all of these mystifications just disappear, which is just like, whoa! It's so cool. I'm trying to think. There's only like one other thing I want to get to, and that's something that's mentioned basically like the first page of the foreword or whatever it is. But is there anything else you want to say on the economic questions of all of this? Because I just kind of want to talk really quickly about this idea of like, why don't quote unquote Marxists use the socially average working hour as their basis? Why do they mess around with it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think we've touched on everything that we might have wanted to touch on. I'm a little bit worried that something we kind of missed out on was the jump from kind of like the jump from the freedom of producers to the equality of producers. Kind of thing.
Sure, yeah.
So basically, like they're this is wheeling all the way back to some extent to the beginnings of their criticism that stems from the criticism of wage labor. You kind of touched on this actually, to say that like, just to say that the workers need to be given the right to dispose of the products, what they produce, kind of thing. They need to own and control what they produce. Isn't to say that they should just have the freedom to dispose of it in whatever way they please. But I wish I could do a better job with this. I'm sort of like,
I mean, that would almost just be impossible too. because we have a social division of labor. It's like,
yeah.
that's
I mean,
insane, but impossible.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's good, right? Like, one of the distinctions that they focus on for at length that we haven't really touched upon is this idea that like capitalism was already socialized production. Like, I mean, this is again the essence of commodity fetishism, right? Like, we don't see it in our daily life. All we experience is our relationship to the world of commodities, but behind the commodities there's a vast web of social connections between human beings, all the different people that have contributed all sorts of various types of labor to make it possible that a certain thing is now in front of you in the shop. People, the economy and all the people who work in the economy are already connected socially. What we need to establish is a social regulation of that economy, and a social regulation of both the productive process and, to some extent, the sort of distributive process, I suppose. So this is basically just to say that, well, what one could, because society is already socially connected. One could, if one were a certain type of libertarian, I suppose, or a certain type of anarchist, one might be inclined to read from this criticism of the vast majority of people's separation from ownership of means of production, to just say that everybody should have their own piece of means of production. But the communist criticism of that, the one that's expressed in this book, is like, we've moved beyond like small scale production, and it's nobody's intention to take us back to small scale production. The same way we can't go to sort of small scale consumption of things, but instead we need to have socially sort of a sort of society-wide social regulation of these things.
Yeah, this is the idea of having the rules.
Yeah.
Having a unit of account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get onto more of this in the later chapters of this book, and so maybe I would leave this now as a kind of like, here is a bit of a big open space as to what this would look like, I suppose.
Yeah, talk about another open space as well is kind of decision making. That, I mean, again, first 4 chapters of the book hasn't been touched on at all, but I am interested to see if it tackles it at all, which I would imagine it probably doesn't, because this book is called Fundamental Principles of Communist Production and Distribution, not Fundamental Principles of Communist Organization and Societal Planning. But how you would come together to be like, we're gonna build the world's biggest boat. You know what I mean? I don't know why I'd build a big boat, but like, you know, there are certain things that have global impacts, I suppose, and you know, you would have to have some sort of planning to plan on those. One that comes to mind is climate change, and kind of like how that would be organized. I think we can kind of put that to bed, though, because again, they might talk about it, they might not. We'll come to that later. But I did just want to touch on really quickly in the foreword by the actual original authors about how, again, this question of why don't Marxists like this? Why don't Marxists realize that this is the goddamn thing? It's not just giving things to the state. As we said in our previous episode, socialism isn't just when the state does a thing. And it just has, this could be, I like stood up when I first read this and I was just like fist pump, like, yes, because I love this so much. So basically the question being posed is, why don't Marxists and supposed communists like the economic basis that they put forward of time, of socially average labor hour? And they say this explanation is very simple. The intellectuals critical of capitalism do not like the alternative that has been presented. For the communist parties fighting the leading power, the idea is perfectly natural that the workers in the factories take over the power and hand it to the intellectual vanguard, so that the latter can then organize society in the name of and for the good of the working class. The idea that the workers in the factories take power in order to control the relationship from producer to product themselves based on the calculation of working hours without the need for privileged leadership does not fit in with their idea of essentially structured economic and administrative apparatus. But also, the libertarian communists do not like the economic basis of the free association of free and equal people, as shown by Marx and Engels. They want to live in a communist society and at the same time be free from it. And that just rocks. I just love that. Slamming the intellectuals, slamming the libertarian communists. It just rocks. It's just so good.
We live in a society. Yeah.
We do indeed live in a society, and I don't want to be free from it. Yeah, I don't know which bit I liked more, them hassling the intellectuals or hassling the libertarian communists. I think hassling the intellectuals.
Yeah.
I think that's just what I'm going to say. I think that was good. only read the first 80 some odd pages. Pick this book up. That's all I'll say. I don't have any more in the book. The book's good. That's what I'll say.
It's a nice looking book. It'll look good on your shelf.
Yeah.
If you're one of those people that color coordinates your books, it's a nice white with some red font. Is that Daddy Day?
Daddy Day. Excuse me.
That's the font.
It's like, what the hell? Very clever. Could be, honestly. Wow, that'd be good. You know, Dan, I don't know if you noticed. I appreciate you not saying anything, but I am wearing Crocs at the moment. And I don't know if I actually should say this on air. New in what sense? I was walking over to the allotment and I saw a big skip. For our American
I'm totally
listeners,
on board with this.
For our American listeners, a skip is a dumpster, all right? And I think someone was moving, or they're getting evicted, or they're doing construction. There was a bunch of really good stuff in there, and I saw that sitting on top there was a pair of Crocs, and I kept walking, and then I stopped, and I was like, those look like they'd fit me. So I went back, got them, washed them up, and I got a new pair of black Crocs. It's like they've like never been worn. Someone was throwing them out. They're one size too small though, so I have to wear them open back. But I can vibe with that.
You're okay being that guy.
Yeah, I could be that guy. Yeah, flat down.
I just thought that you didn't know how Crocs worked.
No, Dan, I know how Crocs work.
Okay.
Come on now.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I had noticed.
Okay.
It
Thanks
hadn't
for
been a
saying
deliberate
anything.
intention on my part not to comment, because I just assumed I'd probably seen you wearing them before.
Yeah. They're good. I will say. Skips, folks. There's a lot of really good stuff. There's like a big bird bath, and I was like, oh, I could maybe even like collect water in there, almost like a pond. But it was under 50 other pairs of Crocs. So yeah,
Well, I'm going to go looking for some Crocs in a bit then.
Yeah, I haven't told anybody that that's where I got them, but what are you gonna do?
Wow.
I haven't gotten
Just me and the listeners.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't gotten any of the buttons that you put in the holes yet. I've been wearing them a lot, and I've had the possibility of like getting a Croc tan, which is the like circles on your foot. I think I'd wear that with pride. Not a sandal tan, but a Croc tan. All right, why not? Oh, I shouldn't have talked about that.
Well, it's definitely staying in.
All right, good.
Are we done?
I think
don't
we
know.
can
I
be
feel
done.
like there was loads of stuff, but it's such a good book, guys. It's such a
It
good
is.
book.
And it is so well, it's easily accessible. I think you just got to get over the hump of understanding what they mean, which they honestly do a good job of explaining, but what they mean by the socially average working hour. So maybe read some Marx before you read this, but honestly, you kind of don't really need to. It's good. That's all I'll say. And yeah, the rest of the book, I suppose, is them going through a couple more ideologies and being like, idiots, wrong, you fools. And then kind of getting a little bit more into... There's a chapter actually on agriculture that I'm looking forward to reading. That's that on that. But abolition of the market, expansion of production. That'll be interesting. How do we expand production? So yeah, looking forward to it. And we will finish this soon. So yeah. I think that's all to say on it.
Excellent. We can correct any glaring errors in future episodes.
Oh, they were saying base it on concrete labor. Oh no. Oh dear. Anything else, Dan? Anything just in life? Anything else? Any good skip holes?
Have I pulled anything out of skips? I feel like I did inspect a skip recently, but I don't think I've not done any good. I've not got any good stuff out of a skip in a
There's been
while.
a lot of crappy ones around.
Yeah.
Just like insulation and like.
Yeah. I have no use for a load of foam insulation, I don't think.
I might borrow you on if you're free, that is, on a Saturday, because there's a allotment plot that someone's abandoned, and there's a bunch of stuff there that they need to clean up. There's a lot of work that they need to do to clean it up to get ready for the next person, but there's a lot of stuff where the guy is just like, if you help, you can just have this stuff. 'Cause I went to I went to B&Q to get some netting to keep those pigeons off of the damn Brussels sprouts and to get a saw. And then I went over to the allotment and the guy was like, hey, come look at this if there's anything you want. And there was netting and a saw. And I was just like, all right. It's like, great, glad I walked all the way to B&Q. Whatever.
I mean, I thought you just might dismantle your fox protection and use some of that netting to cover the...
No, yeah, but I mean, then what are you going to do? Then what are you going to do? It's the foxes or the pigeons. Both of which seem to be working in tandem to get me. It's like some sort of fantastic Mr. Fox style scenario. Yeah, all right. I don't know anything. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I've lost my train of thought. I mean, call it quits on this.
Calling it quits. This book rocks. And yes, we don't need to plug it anymore, but just to plug it one more time, go watch our interview with Thelma. Thelma rocks.
Yeah. Thanks so much to her.
Yeah.
It's all good fun.
Yeah.
End on a low energy ebb.
End on an ebb. My name's been Jack. This has been Auxiliary State. Thanks
I've
for
been Dan. Thanks for listening to the podcast.
The music you heard this episode was Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. If you like this song, you can check it out and much, much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. Be sure and follow us up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you like what you heard, be sure and tune in next week for some more commie discussion. Till next time.